Hey guys, welcome to another Kickster review. So today I'm going to be giving my full spoiler breakdown of Mission Impossible 7 Dead Reckoning Part 1. If you've seen my non-spoiler or out of theater reviews of this film so far, then you would know that I had kind of mixed feelings about this film, but I was still kind of trying to process exactly how I feel about it exactly. But I'm here to say, after a lot of consideration, unfortunately it's kind of gone down a little bit in my mind now that I've had the time to truly process the whole film. And I'm going to break that down today exactly as to what I liked about it and what I disliked and why I ultimately came out disappointed. So without reciting the whole story again, instead I'll just touch on the spoiler aspects of the story that I didn't mention last time. Starting off with the villain, Gabriel. So he is a member of Ethan Hunt's past who was tied to him since before his days with the IMF. So they had sort of a dilemma or a bad thing that happened between them a long time ago. And so now this face or ghost from Ethan's past is now coming back to haunt him with the weapon of the AI entity in his hands. And they're obviously after a key that will gives them the means to basically destroy this entity, which is what Ethan Hunt and his team is after throughout the whole film. And that's how Hayley Atwell's character Grace gets thrown into the mix. She's a pickpocket or a thief essentially, and she gets caught up in it all. And so they're basically on this like wild goose chase around the world to find this the other missing piece of this two-piece key. Leads them to a point in Venice where Ilsa, played by Rebecca Ferguson, is there. And spoiler alert, she gets actually killed in a battle with Gabriel, killed by a knife. And so this is kind of a turning point for Ethan in the story, where everyone, up until this point, everyone had been kind of operating in the digital mainframe and trying to, with their communications and whatnot. And the entity was always one step ahead. You know, it's obviously latching onto their communications and being able to manipulate them, literally imitating voices and people and causing characters to do things that they're not meant to be doing because they think they're talking to someone else, but really it's an AI. And so basically from that point on, Ethan and his team have to basically use analog means of communication so that they're sort of off the grid and the entity can't track them. This leads up to the final act, which takes place with a train where Ethan has to basically jump onto a train via parachute. We've seen the stunt in the trailers, and this is where it all takes place, and it's a whole massive scene that plays out where you got some characters aboard the train and there's a deal going down involving the keys, and meanwhile Ethan's trying to get on there to obtain the keys from them. And the film basically ends where there's a train that's going off an exploded bridge, and so it's going to crash, and so Ethan's trying to get they're trying to get all the people off board, and meanwhile him and Hayley Atwell are still there, and they're like basically just fighting for their life to save themselves from not falling off the cliff. And basically the film ends with Ethan flying away on a parachute whilst Grace faces Kittredge from IMF, and she's basically trying to become involved with the IMF team, which is based on a deal that her and Ethan had brokered earlier in the movie. And so that's where the movie ends. So it does have kind of a conclusive ending for a part one, but there is still obviously a lot to be done in the part two, obviously with the entity still as strong as ever, and is obviously the final film will be all about Ethan taking down the entity. Now I know that everything I've just said now about the story might not make much sense because I've skipped over a lot of things there, but I'm just trying to highlight the areas of the film that are actual spoilers for the plot. But right now I'm going to detail the aspects of the story that I had issues with. Starting with the villain. So as I mentioned, Gabriel is the main villain here, and he is a person of Ethan's past who they had conflict with. And yeah, look, he's just meant to represent kind of the face of the entity, which is AI, because obviously AI is the main villain, but it has no face, so they need to put a face to it. And to me, it was a really weak, quite a weak decision to basically shoehorn in this history with Ethan Hunt that had never been referenced in any other Mission Impossible films. It feels like like they couldn't come up with something to create greater scale and magnitude for these final two films in the Mission Impossible saga, and so they just basically created this history for Ethan, but it didn't pay off. You didn't feel the weight or the gravitas. I didn't feel like these two guys had massive history together. Despite the actor giving a great performance as Gabriel, he's threatening and all that, and he's villainous, but to me it's an underwhelming villain for this point in the series. I mentioned earlier that Ilsa dies as one of the biggest spoilers of the film. To me, it actually highlights a greater problem that this film has that I noticed, and that There's a love interest problem with this film, and it's actually been building for a few films now, but it hasn't really been a problem. I think it all kind of culminates in this film. And what I mean by that is any prominent female character that enters into this film has some sort of sexual or love chemistry or romantic chemistry with Ethan Hunt. It's like they can't help it. That anytime Tom Cruise has to come close or has to spend time with a woman, there always has to be some sort of chemistry there. And it hasn't been a problem till now, but it's literally a problem now because you have so many female characters in this film, and they all have substantial screen time, and almost every single one of them has some sort of romantic feelings for Ethan Hunt. It it makes things convoluted unnecessarily. And so specific to Ilsa's character, she's for 3 films now, that the films that she's been in, she's always kind of had this like love, not a love hate, but like she's kind of played both sides with Ethan's character, where sometimes she's with him, sometimes she's not, sometimes she is, sometimes she's not. It just goes back and forth, back and forth, and that's been happening, and it happens in this film as well, where she's kind of with him, but she also has the key, and he wants to get the key from her, but there's like, so it goes back and forth still, and so I feel like killing her off is almost a good thing in that, like, you shouldn't be happy about it, and it's a sad scene, but it's almost feels like, okay, at least it's one person off his list that is not going to always interfere with his affairs, you know. It's like it's a weird thing that there's just so many love interests that he has, but not all of them are like you see him falling in love with them, but it's just more like they all have to have these romantic chemistry moments, and it just makes things awkward, if you ask me. Another issue with this film to me is the exposition. There is a number of scenes throughout this film, and particularly in the beginning, you have like 3 scenes in the space of the first half an hour where there's just straight exposition that doesn't feel natural. It feels like they're talking to the audience to explain the plot or what's happening, rather than just letting natural conversation play out between characters and just showing things happen that the audience can follow. I particularly remember a scene with Ving Rhames' character Luther, where it's like halfway through the film where he just randomly starts it's like almost like a debrief. It's like, okay, so much has happened now since the last exposition. We now need to have another whole scene where he just basically explains everything that has happened and is going to happen now. And it just feels like they're talking directly to us, the audience, rather than the surrounding characters. It doesn't feel natural. It feels very forced, and it's a shame, because I felt like the Mission Impossible films have always had really nice kind of tight dialogue throughout them, and this one just kind of gets really messy and convoluted, and just too much explaining and not enough just like showing of what should be happening. And obviously the main draw of any Mission Impossible film is the action. It's what we ultimately all go for. It's not necessarily for the plot or for any particular like amazing acting performance or drama. It's all about the action. We want to see cool stunts and cool action set pieces. Whilst this film definitely has some incredible action that you can see that they've clearly put a lot of effort into, when I compare it to the previous film, Mission Impossible Fallout, there is no comparison in my eyes. That film had far superior action set pieces. And even if I were to compare just apples with apples, where in Fallout you have a skydiving scene, and in this one you have a skydiving scene too, the one that you've all seen in the trailers. And if you ask me, whilst this one we saw a lot more of the behind the scenes with it, and they built it up to be something more impressive, really it's over pretty quick. And the scene in Fallout is far more impressive because there's a much longer drawn out scene, and you really get to feel the tension and the suspense, because you know it's all real. It's a real skydiving stunt. So to me, the build up for that scene just did not pay off. Or maybe it's just that because we saw the scene in the trailers, it was just kind of a bit underwhelming when we actually saw it take place. But yeah, that was just my thoughts, and that's kind of the summary of the action for me, is that they tried to do a lot of things, but ultimately just didn't quite hit as hard or as well as previous action set pieces from other movies. And as I mentioned in my other reviews, there was a couple moments where the action, instead of it building to a really epic moment, they paid it off with a dumb laugh or a dumb joke. And that really bugged me, because especially at the end, when at the culmination of that base jump where he jumps off that cliff with the bike and parachutes down, there's a whole suspenseful moment going down on the train where Hayley Atwell's character is literally about to die. And you're waiting to see how Ethan's going to save her, how epic it's going to be. But instead it's played for a joke where he literally just randomly smashes through the window and knocks down the guy who's about to kill her, and then by accident knocks out the guy who was also going to kill her. So it's like, it's played for a laugh, and that's the culmination of that scene. It's upsetting because I saw how much effort they put into that moment to make it really incredible, and it is incredible the way they did it, but just the payoff is all a joke, and I hated that. So ultimately, this film is just, there's too much going on. They're trying to juggle too many things at once. It's too convoluted from both a plot and character standpoint. Too many plot elements that they try to get away with, hence the overdone exposition. But then from the character side, they've introduced way too many new characters in this film to be able to properly pay off each of them and give them each, flesh them out each as much as they deserve. I think this most affects the villainous characters, Gabriel and Paris, the female assassin, and even these two agents that are after Ethan throughout the whole film. None of them are given the amount of time that they deserve to be properly fleshed out. And even Ethan's team, they kind of take a backseat throughout a lot of the middle of this film. You don't see them much, but I guess we know who those characters are. So when we do see them, we are more familiar. But when we're trying to learn more about these new characters, we just weren't getting enough of them, in my opinion. So that was just my overall thoughts. It's I think just the theme of this film is convoluted. It's ambitious, but it's convoluted, and it doesn't quite pull off what it's going for. And I won't go into them all, but there are a lot of inconsistencies throughout the film, particularly as it pertains to the entity and its abilities. At times it shows its full power and what it's capable of, but then it also conveniently doesn't show them at times when it really could have, where the good guys are getting away with stuff that the entity could have easily cut them off on. So it just, they didn't manage it correct, consistently throughout the film. They came in when it was convenient to drive the plot in a certain direction, basically. So look, just there's issues throughout this film, but there's also a lot of good. I haven't spoken much about the positives, but look, the characters that are established are just as great as ever. Tom Cruise is awesome. The action, as I said, is great when it's flowing, and when it doesn't pay off scenes with a joke. It's beautifully shot. The music is great. A lot of good things to enjoy about this film, and I would definitely still recommend this film to someone just wanting to switch off a bit and enjoy some action in the cinema. No problems in that regard. Go for it. But ultimately, look, when I came out of the cinema, my thoughts was that it was kind of somewhere in the 7 to 7.5 range. But now that I've actually taken the time to process it, and unfortunately I can kind of see more flaws with it as I've gone through it, I have this film sitting at a 6.5. So 6.5 out of 10. I only give it that score because I do have high expectations of the Mission Impossible films. They have each gotten progressively better, I think, particularly since the third film. And Mission Impossible Fallout is damn near a perfect action film. So this one had a lot to live up to, and unfortunately it didn't. But it does have the ability to potentially redeem itself, where it's got a part 2 coming out that maybe pays off a lot of things for this film that might make it sit a bit better. But there are still some things about this film that, no matter what happens in part 2, still don't quite make sense in this one. So that's my thoughts at the end of the day. 6.5 out of 10. Would love to know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and if you're enjoying my content, please subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye.